Hello. Welcome to the podcast. This is it. This has been in the making for like 2 years probably, or at least I've been thinking about doing this for like 2 years. Haven't actually tried, but this is it. I thought today would be a good day to get the podcast going. Yeah. So welcome to the Hockey Variety Hour podcast, where it's just as advertised. I talk about everything. That's the plan, at least. I really don't want to feel like I'm restricted to talking about all 32 NHL teams or something like that. I think you listen to. There's some very good hockey podcasts out there, but I feel like they have to meet a quota. And if I go a full year without talking about, I don't know, the Philadelphia Flyers, let's say, like I don't want to feel bad about it. So I'll probably end up talking about every team at some point, but don't want to feel like I'm really restricted to a certain agenda, because I want to talk about everything. I don't just want to talk about the NHL, I want to talk about my own rec hockey, beer league. I'm very involved in beer league. We have a league here in, I'll say central British Columbia. I don't really want to give away too much about where I'm at. My name is Josh, by the way, though. This is my podcast. Welcome. And just kind of in central BC, we have a really good, I think it's a pretty good league, to be honest. It definitely has its criticism in terms of decisions that get made or the officiating, but like that's also kind of normal at the same time, I think. I think it's overall a pretty good league. They keep track of stats and standings and things like that. Of course, there's things here and there that kind of grind my gears, but overall, I think it's ran pretty well. Though I do have guys I know who've played in other leagues that say it's a bit of a joke, and I don't know. That might just be more of an emotional reaction, but I don't know. I think the league's just fine. So yeah, NHL Beer League. I'm definitely involved in fantasy hockey. I do plan on talking about that pretty often. I'm in 2 leagues right now. Neither are money leagues, but that's okay. I think the bragging rights side of things is good. I'm in a league with some of my old roommates from way back when that we started probably close to 10 years ago now. It's getting up there. And last season was the first season I took it seriously in a while, and I ended up winning. But at the same time, when you have Connor McDavid, it's pretty easy to to have a pretty good fantasy hockey season, I would say. So I'm in that league, and then I started a league. Well, I didn't start it. Sorry, one of my teammates started it. But I'm in a league with some of my beer leaguers as well. So we'll just, a bit of bragging rights there too. So, and in that league, I'm in first right now. But, I did get Draisaitl in the draft there. And it's crazy how important the draft is in fantasy hockey too, because like I said, I won my other league last year, and right now I'm pretty close to the bottom, but I had an awful draft. Like, I think my first pick was Jonathan Huberdeau, who's unfortunately struggling this season. I think he's turning it around. I haven't actually been paying too much attention to Calgary as of late, but I had an awful draft, and I think that kind of sunk the season for me pretty early, but nah, it's okay. Luck of the draw. I think I really rolled the dice with some players in that. And obviously I've been focusing more on my beer league fantasy hockey right now, which I am in first, like I said, but it's still really close near the top. We definitely have some guys that know what they're doing and take it pretty seriously. So yeah, plan on talking about fantasy hockey in this podcast as well. I do want to talk about hockey history. I think there's just so many fascinating things that's happened over the years in hockey. I do want to focus on recent history too. I feel like, the 2000s, early 2010s, I don't think it gets covered quite a bit. And I do plan on talking about the 2000s at some point during this podcast today. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, very interested in hockey history as well. There's just so many interesting things, so many good stories. Got some bad stories in there too, I guess, and I plan on talking about, some stuff that just doesn't get covered too much and maybe give you a different perspective on things, I definitely like sharing my opinion. I'm very opinionated when it comes to hockey. That's one of the main reasons why I'm starting this podcast too. And I really try to look at things from different perspectives as well. I don't try to just kind of give my take and then really stick to it. I try to see things from different angles because I think that's important, especially in this sport. I definitely think there are some things that are wrong with hockey culture that need to be addressed. So that's something I plan on talking about in this podcast as well. So yeah, NHL, beer league, fantasy, history, talk about hockey culture as well. I'm going to try to talk about each of those in every single podcast, and we'll see how often I end up doing this. This is very much just for me. This is definitely something I just want to do. The expectations are incredibly low for me. So if I get to 10 subscribers by the end of next year, it's late 2022 right now. It's December. It's actually a few days before Christmas here, and if this time next year, if I have 10 subscribers, that's a win for me, I would say. Yeah, and it's a good day to do a podcast because it is very cold outside today. It is about -40, which, isn't anything out of the ordinary for me. I did grow up in the Northwest Territories, and I think that's really kind of changed my outlook on a lot of things. But at the same time, I've lived here for a bit, and -40, it's still bad. I mean, I know it was a regular thing for me when I was growing up, and I worked in the territories too in my 20s for about 3 years, and I really enjoyed that experience. But super duper cold, you do get used to it. But hey, one of the reasons why I moved here was to get away from the cold, and here it's following me. So good day to do a podcast. And I plan on keeping this on YouTube, but if I somehow get some viewers and they want me to switch over to Spotify or Apple Music or wherever other people get their podcasts, I'll definitely make that jump. But it's very much a YouTube thing right now. It's me and my crappy slideshows and my logo that was made on Paint. Is it Microsoft Paint? The Paint application, and that's just my beer league team's logo. So I don't know if this gets some kind of success. Maybe I'll take the smaller things a bit seriously, but in the meantime, it is what it is. I just kind of screencast and use a Microsoft PowerPoint for this. So that's the plan. That's the plan going forward. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to doing this. Let's get into the first topic, though. I want to talk about fandom. Okay, hockey fandom. I don't think that worked. Let me try this again. Hockey fandom. There we go. Okay, so I will talk about why each of those teams are on the screen. There is a reason they are all there. They are either teams that I cheer for, or I once cheered for, or I'm kind of indifferent about. I'll talk about each of those in a second. But before I get into why all of those are there, it's important to talk about why do we cheer for the teams that we cheer for, right? It's something that really fascinates me, especially as someone that comes from somewhere that isn't really close to any NHL team. Because I think the most important factor overall is geography. I think it's most people cheer for the team that's closest to them, okay? If you live in Vancouver, there's a pretty good chance you're going to end up being a fan of the Vancouver Canucks. And that makes perfect sense, right? You can go to the games. The Vancouver Canucks games are probably broadcast on TV for you, unless you got the blackouts, which is so dumb. I don't know why that's a thing. Well, I know why that's a thing. I'm assuming they want to promote the cable companies and all that and getting fans to watch the games that way. But it's dumb. And I think it's also kind of promoting people to, go to kind of like the sketchy streaming sites to watch those games, which the NHL probably, they should want. So just get rid of the blackouts. So anyways, I think geography is the biggest factor overall. And it's interesting. I currently live somewhere that it's about the same distance to Vancouver as it is Edmonton. And I would say overall, most of the fans are Vancouver Canucks fans. It's the only team in this province, which makes sense, but there are quite a few Edmonton fans as well, because again, it's accessible to some degree to go to Edmonton Oilers games or Vancouver Canucks games, which is really, really important. I also feel like there's kind of a, what's it called, the herd mentality or something. Like, people want to fit in and people want to cheer for the teams that other people cheers for. And that might be why they became fans in the first place, is because, you grow up, you go to school, a bunch of friends are Canucks fans, so then you become a Canucks fan as well. It makes sense, right? But yeah, again, if you grew up somewhere that isn't really close to an NHL team, like the Northwest Territories, like me, who do you cheer for, right? I mean, the easiest games to get to from pretty much anywhere in the Northwest Territories is Edmonton, because Edmonton's kind of a hub city for those smaller communities. So, if you got a weekend, there's a Saturday night game in Edmonton, got some money to spend, bring a friend or bring a family member, head down to Edmonton and catch a game. And they have that really, really nice arena there. I've been to that rink once, maybe twice. I think I've only been there once, actually. I saw the Tampa Bay Lightning completely destroy the Edmonton Oilers. That was one of those seasons when they had McDavid, but they somehow sucked at the same time, it was a really weird couple of seasons. And I actually do want to talk about one of those seasons in particular, not in this episode, but in one of the other first few episodes I have going here. Because I do have a plan, believe it or not. I do have a plan. So yeah, I mean, the easiest to get to is Edmonton. So I would say overall, the most popular team in the Northwest Territories is probably Edmonton, but, Vancouver's there, Calgary's there, Western Canada kind of makes sense too. And when you look at Nunavut too, I think the most accessible city in Nunavut is from like Iqaluit, I think is Ottawa. So you kind of expect more Ottawa fans. But I used to fly through a town called Rankin Inlet, Nunavut, pretty often when I was growing up. And I remember that was around the same time Jordan Tootoo got drafted. And it was by Nashville, right? He got drafted by Nashville. He played there for, I think, at least a few seasons. And it was really funny because whenever I go through that airport, you would see like Nashville Predators flags and like posters and stuff. And it's just like, it's so funny because it's this random small town in Nunavut. And there's all these Nashville Predators fans there, which is just so random, I thought. And it's kind of funny looking back at it, but it's kind of cool how the game can have that kind of power, So yeah, and it makes you wonder too, like with fans who are in Europe, like who do they cheer for? And I think the most logical thing would be they cheer for certain players, right? I mean, if you live in Finland, it makes sense that you cheer for the player who, a superstar from Finland, and then you end up cheering for that team. And I think that's why you see the NHL Global Series go to certain European cities, is because of the stars, They pick those teams on purpose because they'll have a superstar from a particular country. Like this year, where was it? Was it in Prague? I think it was San Jose and Nashville. And then San Jose obviously has Timo Meier, what am I talking about? Thomas Hertl, who's from the Czech Republic, and he's, I would say, arguably one of the best players from there too. I mean, I know you got David Pastrnak too, but Thomas Hertl's pretty underrated. And oh, by the way, if it's not obvious, I am a fan of the Sharks, which I'll get to, I swear. But yeah, so they go to those cities for a reason, to promote the game for those players. So, I think if you're not from North America, it makes sense that you cheer for certain players and then ultimately that team. And yeah, I would say those are probably the biggest factors. Now, why am I a Sharks fan? That might seem pretty random. I'm a guy from the Northwest Territories in Canada, and I cheer for this team in California, which is so random. And I think it kind of goes back to the same thing I was saying about Europe, where you cheer for certain players. Because when I was a kid, I cheered for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I cheered for the Toronto Maple Leafs particularly for one player. I was a huge fan of Curtis Joseph. And looking back, he's probably, top 5 favorite players of all time. But when I was a kid, I was super obsessed with Curtis Joseph. I had his book. Actually, I don't think I got his book until he made a book after he retired, and then I read that. And he's had quite the life too. I mean, he he had a pretty difficult childhood and the odds were pretty stacked against him. Very much an underdog. I think he was undrafted. Don't quote me on that, but if he was drafted, it was probably pretty low in the draft. And, he helped a St. Louis Blues team overperform, I would say. They had some pretty good players, but I think Curtis Joseph was that big part that kind of gave him some success in the playoffs. Same with Edmonton as well. You look at some of those teams on paper, Curtis Joseph was the biggest part of that. And then the Leafs, and I think that was the team he got the most recognition for because he took that team to, I think, a couple conference finals. I think they were in the East by then too. I know Toronto was in the West for a while, at least in the 90s there. And that's when I watched Curtis Joseph the most too, was Toronto. Always on Hockey Night in Canada too. Obviously, we only had cable back then, so, Toronto, Montreal, Edmonton, those are the games we ended up watching the most. So it makes sense that I would end up cheering for the Leafs because that's the team I got to watch the most just because of cable. Because, in the 90s, 2000s, there's no streaming or anything. So it makes sense that you would cheer for the teams that you can actually watch on TV, And yeah, so I was a big fan of Cujo. I really like Matt Sundin as well. What a guy. What a leader. Seriously, he's got to be one of the best leaders of all time. And he just seems like such a humble individual. And yeah, kind of weird that he ended up going to Vancouver. But I get it. You're chasing a cup. I totally get it. And that's another thing I want to talk about on this podcast too. It's veterans going to certain teams to hopefully have some success. So eventually Cujo made his way to Detroit. And that's when I started to not really cheer for the Leafs anymore. Because I was a fan of Cujo, right? So when he got moved, did he get traded or signed? I can't remember how he ended up in Detroit, but he ended up in Detroit. Detroit, they just needed that last piece, so they got the goalie. He's had playoff success in the past. He should be able to get Detroit to another cup, and he doesn't. He struggled in the playoffs with Detroit, and I don't know. It felt kind of weird trying to cheer for Detroit for Cujo, because, I don't know. When you start cheering for a team and they're one of the best teams in the league, I don't know. That whole bandwagon-y thing just doesn't sit right with me, But, if you're a kid, it kind of makes sense that, you would cheer for the team that's having success during that, during that era or whatever. But I just couldn't get into Detroit, and it was tough watching Cujo struggle. He eventually made his way to Phoenix, because they were still the Phoenix Coyotes back then. And then Calgary, I think, and then Toronto again, I think. And there might have been another stop in there somewhere, but yeah, his career ended how a lot of other goalies, how their careers end, which is unfortunately not on a high note most of the time. It's too bad he never won a cup. I think he should be in the Hall of Fame, but I think a lot of that's because of my own personal bias as well. I think there's guys who should be in there before him, mainly Alex McGinley and JR, but I would love to see Cujo get in the Hall of Fame someday. I think he has a King Clancy trophy, and that might be his only piece of hardware. He might have a gold medal in there, but you know what? I think he should be in. He played a ton of games. So anyways, Sharks. Yeah, so when Cujo went to Detroit, I kind of looked around and I was like, you know what? I need a new role model, essentially. I was a goalie up until my late 20s. And I'll talk about why I ended up becoming a skater. I'm mostly a defenseman now, but I was a goalie from when I was about 8 or 9 until I was 28. And I was looking for another goalie to cheer for, right? I was a big fan of Cujo and Evgeny Nabokov, who's a Russian goalie for the Sharks. Especially in the 2000s, he was one of the best goalies in the league. And he was one of the first to really perfect that butterfly style. He was so athletic. You see some of those big monstrous saves that Vasilevsky makes now. That it reminds me so much of Nabokov. He was just so flexible, just unreal saves, right? It was almost like Hasek like, but a little bit more technical, I would say. He was definitely, I think he had better form, but I mean Hasek is a legend. I can't say anything bad about him, but he was a little unorthodox at times, and I think Nabokov did a lot of the same thing, but in my opinion, he played it a bit more safe, I thought. But unreal goalie. And the Sharks were an up and coming team around that time too. I don't think they had Thornton quite yet. I would say it was when they went to the West Finals against Calgary in 2004. That's when the Sharks really got my attention. And eventually, yeah, they got Joe Thornton in 05-06. And, he's a player. How do you not cheer for Jumbo Joe? He seems like such a great guy. And they had Marlowe, and I don't think they had Dan Boyle yet, but they would eventually get Dan Boyle. So lots of players to like on that team. But yeah, I was a big fan of Nabokov, and that's how I became a fan of the Sharks, and I just stuck with it, really. So I guess, yeah, most of my life, I'm about to turn 31 here at the time of recording this. So most of my life, I've been a fan of the Sharks. And Nabokov's definitely the biggest part of that. But of course, over the years, I find other players to cheer for. I was definitely, I'm more of a fan of players, I would say, than specific teams. But, Logan Couture, how can you not like that guy? He's so clutch in the playoffs. Man, I can't wait to talk about Game 7 against Vegas in this podcast. Oh man, that might end up being the greatest game I've ever watched. But yeah, so many players on the Sharks to cheer for. It's too bad they never really had a goalie like Nabokov. Martin Jones struggled. I was really big on Martin Jones, and I'm glad to see he's kind of turned things around in Seattle this season. His numbers didn't look great in Philly, but that was a bad team, so it kind of makes sense. But I'm glad to see he's turning things around in Seattle. I actually think I should have Seattle on here too, because I'm definitely rooting for them as well. I like seeing these smaller and overall newer markets succeeding, except for Vegas, because as a Sharks fan, I'm not allowed to like Vegas. I don't know if there's still a rivalry there, considering Vegas is good and San Jose's bad right now, which I'll also talk about later on too. But yeah, I'm a fan of the Sharks. I'll probably end up talking about them quite a bit in this podcast. This isn't going to be a Sharks podcast by any means, but that's my team. That's who I follow. All right, let's talk about the teams on the right here and why I have them. So these are all teams that I root for, or I kind of root for, or I should root for, right? So we'll start with Columbus. And now another really random team to have up there as a Canadian. I don't think I've ever met another Canadian that actually roots for the Blue Jackets, because it's a small market and it's a little bit random. I've met Sharks fans in Canada, but not Columbus fans. And the reason why I cheer for them, it's really stupid. It's a really dumb story. So I had one of the NHL games in, I think it was NHL 17 I had. I don't even remember what console I had. I think it was the Xbox. Not the newest Xbox, but the one that came before it. And yeah, I had an NHL game, and I did the whole create a player thing. And, the game, it like drafts you to a team, and you play your career with that team. And I didn't stick with it too long, but I think I played a full season on create a player. And I got drafted by Columbus. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. I'm going to stick with this and see how it goes, right? And, I'm playing through the game, and, I start seeing some names there, like Cam Atkinson, and I was like, oh man, they have a guy named Boone. That's so funny. What a weird name, right? And, after playing the game, I was like, hey, I should watch them on TV. I should watch some Columbus games and, actually see how they are. They had Sergei Bobrovsky at the time, who was, a fantastic goalie in his prime. Very much like Nabokov, where it was just really fun to watch him. So he caught my attention for sure. And I ended up just watching more and more Columbus games that season, and they were really turning the corner too. I think that was the year they lost to Pittsburgh in the playoffs, which is a series that really, It really made me mad. I can't remember what game it was, but I remember Zach Werenski took a puck to the face, and they didn't stop the play, which is something I definitely plan on ranting about in this podcast, is when the officials don't blow down the play when someone's seriously hurt. And on that same play, the Pittsburgh Penguins ended up scoring. I think it might have been the winning goal that game too, and I was so mad about that. And there was a big stretch there where I really didn't like the Penguins. I don't really dislike any teams now. And I don't know, maybe if Pittsburgh was still like top cheese in the league, I'd probably still dislike them. And they beat the Sharks in the finals in 2016, and that didn't help either. So anyways, yeah, I've just been rooting for the Blue Jackets since then. I was very happy to see that in this last offseason they managed to sign Johnny Gaudreau, another player I really, really like. And it's too bad that this season just hasn't been going their way. They had a lot of injuries, and I'm not going to lie, I haven't watched too many Columbus games because there's other teams right now that are really interesting me. Mainly Buffalo and Arizona, which I'll talk about after I talk about the Leafs. So I already mentioned that I was a fan of the Leafs when I was a kid, and you know what? I want them to do well. I want that group to succeed. I do. But it's tough. Part of me dislikes they get so much attention, and I think it's seriously having like a psychological effect on them, right? And that's another reason why I'm not huge on Canadian teams. It's just the markets really annoy me. It has nothing to do with the players at all. I want them to succeed, but the media in those markets it's overwhelming. And as a result, I feel like a lot of the fans, and don't get me wrong, there's good fans in every market. And there's bad fans in every market too. There's scumbags that cheer for every team, and that's just sports as a whole. But I think there's too much Toronto, and I think that's having an effect on the guys, which is really unfortunate. One thing I do plan on talking about in this podcast is that I don't think Austin Matthews is going to stay in Toronto when his contract comes up, unless they win a Stanley Cup. Or, I'm going to say if they make the Cup finals one year, he'll resign. They need to have success, and that's more than just the first round, right? You look at Florida getting out of the first round for the first time last season, and I'm not going to lie, it was a little underwhelming. I thought that it was going to be like, wow, what a success, But I think they needed to do more damage in the playoffs than that. Not to mention, I think they got swept by Tampa, so not a good end to that at all. I think didn't have internet last playoffs, unfortunately, because we were moving. Long story, but I was listening to a lot of games because I like doing the radio thing because I don't know, I'm an old soul, I guess, and I listened to a lot of the games for Florida in the playoffs, and it sounds like they just got their butts kicked by Tampa. So, anyways, it's not about Florida though; it's about Toronto. We're talking about right now. I do want those guys to be successful. I look at how cool it was when the Raptors won the NBA championship a few years ago, and how just big that was seeing a championship come to Canada. I think they've been good for too long. I don't like seeing them losing in the first round over and over again. And there's a psychological thing there too, I know last playoffs was, that's a tough out, Tampa defending Stanley Cup champions 2 times at that point. It's going to be tough to beat them, right? But I think that first round loss to Montreal 2 years ago, I think that really shows that there was a lot of just kind of, they're inside their own heads, right? And I think the media is a big part of that, I think if I personally played in a Canadian market, I'd probably have no social media at all. I would try to stay off anything that can distract me from the game. And I really hope the guys in Toronto are doing that too, because you got to cut out the media. It's nuts. So part of me wants them to succeed. Part of me doesn't really want to see that market get that kind of attention, because I don't want those bad fans to think that they earned something. When people are like, oh, we are going to win a cup, and it's like, buddy, you're not on the team, But hey, who am I to say? I've never cheered for a team that ended up winning the championship. It's not like San Jose's won a cup ever. I hope they do someday in my lifetime. But there's 32 teams now, and only one team can win, right? And I don't know if Toronto's going to be that team in the next 2 years. And I think Austin Matthews will be on his way out. I'm not saying he's going to go to the Coyotes or anything, but I think Toronto needs to at least make a cup finals if he's going to stick around. Because why should he stick around, right? He's going to get paid somewhere else. The media is probably super annoying for him, I would imagine. Why should he stick around, really? I mean, what's the incentive for him? I think when you look at Gaudreau leaving Calgary, and I'm sure a bunch of fans were just like, oh, you betrayed us, this and that, right? But it's like, he's an American player. He has the right to go home, right? I think we look at players like John Tavares, who left an American market to come home, right? And that's a nice story. And, he's been a good fit in Toronto. I'm very happy for him. But for some reason, that doesn't apply to American players for some reason, right? I mean, Gaudreau wanted to go back east, He's from a big hockey family. He wants his family to see him play. He's earned that right, And, hey, if Calgary wanted to keep him, they should have had more success when they had him. Because championships, it fixes everything, right? You see all these players that keep re-signing in Tampa because they win. That's the way I see it. And same with Tkachuk. Like, he doesn't have to stay, he doesn't owe Calgary anything, right? Yeah, they drafted him. Yeah, they gave him that opportunity, I guess. But I feel like we don't hold the same standard for American players. And same with Matthews, right? He's earned that right to go home. He's a UFA. He's going to get paid somewhere. I think he's going to go somewhere out west. Not necessarily Arizona, but a team out west that can afford him when the time is right. I.e., probably not San Jose because they have so many bad contracts right now. So yeah, overall, I wouldn't mind seeing the Leafs win. I really do want to see a Canadian team win in my lifetime. I want to see how that, really how that changes things here. I think that'd be really good for the sport. So, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of American markets that could use a championship, which segues me into the Buffalo Sabres. They're a team I've been watching a lot this season. And how can you not? I mean, they're so exciting. And Tage Thompson, he's just insane. I know everybody pumps his tires, but he's just such an exceptional player. And I was definitely one of those people that was skeptical about the contract that he got. One season, it's like, I don't know. But he's really making management look like a bunch of geniuses right now because he's been great. And I think in a few years, people are going to look at that cap hit and say, wow, what a steal. He's going to be the next, in terms of his contract, he's going to be the next McKinnon, where they look at him as like, whoa, what a deal, right? And who knows, maybe he'll be as good as McKinnon. He's a really good player. And you know what? I think him having success has also made me feel better about the Mattias Samuelsson contract that was signed earlier this season. Because that was long term. I can't remember the cap hit. But he didn't have a goal at that point. I don't even know if he has a goal now. But he didn't have a goal in the NHL at that point. And I know he's a defensive defenseman. But I think the fact that you have a zero in that column's like, man, this guy is inexperienced. And the fact that Buffalo extended Thompson. And then they extended Samuelsson. And now Thompson's being successful. I think that tells me that it's reassuring me on the Samuelsson because it's like, you know what? Maybe management knows what they're doing when they're committing to these players long term. Maybe they know something about Samuelsson that I don't, right? It's tough to really catch what those defensive defensemen do well because they're not making those big flashy plays or anything. So, yeah. And, there's guys on that team I root for, like Jeff Skinner, who I plan on talking about later in this podcast. Jeff Skinner, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, or UPL, as they call him on the broadcast. And Craig Anderson as well. I mean, he's now in his 40s, pretty well into his 40s too, I think. And maybe not. He may only be like 41. But how do you not like Craig Anderson? Like, he's such a great story. He's been a good story his whole career. I want to see him be successful. And, Dahlin, how could How could I forget Darlene? What a player. Seriously. Alex Tuck as well. Yeah, just lots of good stories on that team. And they brought back the Goat Head. The Goat Head looks so sick. And that's a market that, man, they've been through a lot. They need a cup eventually, you know. That market has so much potential, right? I mean, geographically being so close to Canada too, but they have great fans who haven't been going to games. But I think maybe ticket prices are kind of through the roof right now with the economy and this and that. So it could be some of that as well. But I want that team to be successful. Speaking of teams I want to be successful is the Arizona Coyotes. I'm not going to lie. Man, a big part of it's the jerseys. They always have such sick jerseys. I think this year's reverse retros not as good as the purple ones from a few years ago, but they're still ridiculous. They're still great. The Kachina is iconic. They brought back the white Kachina a year or two ago, I think, and that looks sick. They look so good. I highly recommend checking out an Arizona game on TV because that ASU arena, Mullet Arena, it's so sick just seeing those games. And I really want to go to a game while they're playing there because I don't know if an NHL team is ever going to play an arena like that, at least not in the regular season. So I really want to go to Arizona in the next few years and catch a game there. It looks so sick. They got a lot of players that I like. You know, Vejmelka, fantastic. You know, I know that Jacob Chychrun will be on his way out eventually, but he's an exceptional player too. Gostisbehere, you know. And then you got, you know, Schmaltz, right? Schmaltz? Yeah. I get Schmaltz and Schwartz mixed up. And Shen. So a lot of guys have very similar names, but yeah, Lawson Krause, like so many good players on that team. I like watching them. I hope they turn the corner. And I hope they don't get Bedard because that means San Jose didn't get Bedard. So there you go. And finally, the Canucks. I just have the Canucks up there because, you know, geographically, that's the team I should be cheering for. But it's another one of those market things where I can't get on board because the media, man. Like, every single season, Brock Besser, trade, Brock Besser. It's so annoying. Like, he's probably so sick of that. I kind of want Besser to get traded so hopefully he ends up in a market that gets off his case and just leaves him alone, right? And, you know, like, Minnesota's obviously the one that everyone goes to, but Minnesota, the market there, nobody's leaving Matt Dumba alone. It feels like it's been 5 years. It's always Matt Dumba is getting traded, this and that. And it's like, I want to see Brock Besser I want to see him go to Arizona and then people will leave him alone. Or go to some market where people will just leave him alone, you know? It's like the whole South Park Britney Spears thing. It's like, leave Brock alone. You know, it's like that. You know, so I don't know. I don't like the media there a lot, but you know, they're the team that's the only team in the province I live in. I really wonder what the province would be like if Vancouver won a Stanley Cup. You know. And there'd probably be a riot. I'm not going to lie. There'd probably be a riot in Vancouver if they won a cup, which is very sad to say. But after 2011, I got no confidence that people in the city will be able to keep it together. And I know that's not everyone. It's just a bunch of idiots. But that frightens me a bit. You know, it's like if Toronto won a cup, I don't think there would be a riot. I think you'd have a bunch of happy fans. You'd have like some plaza that's just packed full of people, like a whole street packed full of people. And it'd be just a nice big party, really. And I think most Canadian markets would be like that, but just after 2011, I got a bit of a sour taste from Vancouver, and, you know, it'd be cool to see what it would do to the province and hockey culture here. But I don't know. I think we would see some kind of disaster in the city, unfortunately. So I think of all the Canadian teams, I don't know. Really, I wouldn't mind seeing a cup in Canada, but Vancouver, yeah, I don't know. Anyways, we're 40 minutes in here, and I still have a bunch of things to talk about, so I'm going to get into that. All right, I want to talk about a team that is doing well right now, and then I'm going to talk about a team that's not doing so well right now, because I think they're pretty interesting. So I got the Metro standings there. And oh wow, 5 straight. Jeez. Yeah, so Carolina, very interesting story. Obviously, as a Sharks fan, then picking up Brent Burns. Of course I'm rooting for Carolina. Of course. I want to see Burnsy win a cup. They have a bunch of players that I want to see. I want to see them be successful. You know, Jordan Staal, very respected player in the league. I'd love to see him win a championship. I don't know if he has a cup or not, actually. I can't. Pittsburgh, maybe? Was he on Pittsburgh? I think he was. I think he got drafted by Pittsburgh. Anyways, I can't remember if he has a cup or not, but I want to see him win. I don't know, maybe another one if he has one already. You know, Jacob Slavin, all those guys, right? But the guy that's catching my attention right now is Pyotr Kochetkov. And I remember he played some games for Carolina in the playoffs, which is just so impressive. And hey, rookie goalie in the playoffs for Carolina? Shades of Cam Ward, one of the few NHL players I've actually met. Very nice guy. I met him at Sylvan Lake Hockey School. I think it was 2005 because he was on that Carolina team that won the cup the next year, right? Conn Smythe winner. That was so cool meeting him approximately a year before he won. Under a year before he won that cup. Just crazy. Really nice guy. I don't remember him being a great coach, but, you know, he had some good tips and very, very nice guy. And Kochetkov kind of, you know, young goalie. I think he's, you know what? I think he's taking that number one job. I'm not going to lie. Because I don't know Anderson's status off the top of my head, but, you know, Anderson, he's been pretty injury prone lately, and, you know, maybe his career's coming to an end. I don't know. But Kochetkov, he's 23 years old. He's the future. They just signed him to a 4-year contract extension this past week, which made me really happy. I like the cap hit on it. I think he's the future. And you look at those stats from this season, like 9, 1, and 4. Well, 4 is kind of low, but he's got 923, 3 shutouts. He looks great. Really. He's one of the best players on that team right now. Nothing against Ranta, obviously. I like Antti Ranta, but Kochetkov, he's been fantastic. I want to see this kid succeed. Oh, wow, they're tied with the Devils right now. Jeez. I didn't even notice that. I remember the Devils were, like, on top of the world, and looks like you got a few teams that are catching up. That's very, very interesting. I know Washington has been pretty hot lately as well. You know, Ovechkin's chasing that goal record right now, which I'm sure everybody's sick hearing about, but it's a big deal. And 20 years from now, we're going to be like, whoa, we saw Ovechkin have all this success. So I think it's only a matter of time before Ovechkin catches Gretzky as well. He's unreal. I don't think it's a question. He's gonna break that record eventually. So, Carolina, they're doing great. Not my cup pick right now, I would say. I honestly, maybe next episode I'll talk about that. But, who I think is the front runner for the cup right now, because I think there's a lot of teams in the mix. But Carolina's one of those teams, for sure. And I hope they have some success. So who's not doing well? Well, like I said, this is going to be a San Jose podcast a little bit. The Sharks. Now, I think what the most disappointing thing right now about the Sharks is that they haven't fully embraced the rebuild. They haven't gone public about it. Just do it, really. Because, why do you want to be a team that just misses the playoffs at best, right? You should be going full tank. And I know they have some contracts that are going to be really tough to move. One of which is at the bottom of the screen here. A certain player named Erik Karlsson. More on him later. They got a lot of bad contracts, and honestly, it's just ride it out. Ride out the rebuild. Seriously. They've announced that they want to, they announced that they are willing to trade anyone except for Hertl. And I think the Hertl thing is just out of respect because they just re-signed him to an 8-year contract. I think it's 8 years. Might be 7. But it'd be kind of disrespectful if they traded him right away. And I know Vancouver just announced pretty much the same thing, except that their only player that is totally protected is Pedersen rather. And you think they would put JT Miller in that mix because they just signed him. I think it's a respect thing that, hey, we're not going to trade Miller either. Because that's pretty much telling me they're already regretting that contract. And I think it's too early. I don't think Miller's played well this year either, but I mean, come on. Like, you commit to this guy. He's a good player. Have some faith in him. And yeah, with San Jose, Hurdle, I mean, I think he's the future captain of that team eventually. I think he is. It's tough to say he's the future because he's, what, 26, 27? So if they do a rebuild, he'll be in his 30s, but someone's got to lead that team. I think he's a great leader too. And I really do think they might be best shipping off Meyer because they can get a ton for Timo Meyer. And they just need to embrace the rebuild. I'm glad they got a new voice in there with Mike Grier. I like Grier a lot, but just embrace the rebuild. I know the vets don't want it, but that's the business, right? If you're not planning on being a contender someday, like, what are you doing? There's 32 teams. Only one of them is going to win. You need to set yourself up best, and I don't think you can do it with the pieces you have right now. Erik Karlsson. Oh, man. So he's playing really well offensively right now. His defensive stats aren't too bad, considering he's a -6 on a pretty bad team. I don't think that's terrible. 3 game winners, not bad. Yeah, no, I mean, he's putting up some good numbers. The trade value, I don't know, because he's got a terrible contract, right? Even with him playing well, that's a bad contract. I know San Jose would be willing to eat some of that, maybe a couple million, 3 million, if they commit to the rebuild, just to up his value a little bit. But I don't know. Do you wait it out? Because I mean, he's signed long term, right? Maybe wait till the summer, see how he finishes the season. Maybe bank on him having a season that's pretty close to 100 points. We'll see if he gets to 100. That'd be really cool if he did, considering, people like to throw him under the bus, and now he has a 100-point season, perhaps. First defenseman to do that in a while, I believe. So that would be really cool. I think, because I want to see Karlsson be successful. He hasn't won a cup. He's one of my favorite players. I would love for him to have success in San Jose, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's better off going somewhere else, if that's even on the table, because, he's looking really good right now, but who wants to take on that contract? Is this season going to be a one-off? Who knows, right? So San Jose, not in the mix. If we just look at the Pacific, it's here. Obviously, Anaheim. I want Anaheim to be successful so San Jose has a better chance at Bedard. I'm definitely on Team Tank right now. It's cool watching a San Jose game and they win, but deep down I'm like, I kind of wish they lost, So, yeah, and I'm not a fan of the Seals jerseys. I think they're one of the not so great reverse retros, but I don't know. I bought a California Golden Seals hat a few weeks ago, and I really like that hat. So there you go. Vancouver's not making the playoffs. I'm sure there's people that are hanging on to hope, but don't think it's happening. With Calgary, I think it's too early because they have the pieces. It's just a matter of, is everything going to gel, right? There's some good teams in the Central right now. I'm not a betting man. I don't gamble. I think gambling's, I understand why it's a part of sports, and I understand why people do it, but it's not for me. But if I was a gambling man, I would say Calgary doesn't make the playoffs. I think there's just too many good teams in the Central right now that could turn it around as well, but Vancouver has the pieces. They could click. Huberdeau could go on a run. I'm a huge fan of Nazem Kadri. I wouldn't say a huge fan, but I'm a fan of his. I tend to cheer for ex-Leafs that got that got torn apart while they were in Toronto. I like seeing those guys be successful. That includes Phil Kessel when he was on the Penguins. Part of me was happy for him, but overall I was pretty upset because I really didn't like the Pens back then. But I was happy for Kessel. I was happy for Kadri last season too. I want to see those guys be successful, especially after they had a pretty tough time in Toronto. So, and yeah, I'd like to see Calgary be successful for Kadri and Huberdeau and Weegar. I really like Markstrom as well. I just don't think they're going to make it. I think it's just been too rough of a start, personally. The Oilers should make it. But here's the thing. I don't have confidence in LA either. Really, I wouldn't be surprised if LA fell out of the mix by the end of the year, which means maybe Calgary could get in. So, I don't know. And you know what? Seattle's looking pretty okay right now, but I don't know. They're a new team. I wouldn't say they're a lock. And it's weird looking at these standings because like Vegas is a lock, right? They're good. They're really good. Thompson's a machine. And did everyone else forget that they have Leonard still on the shelf? you know? So yeah, I mean, we'll see. I think Vegas and Edmonton are locks, though. I know it's weird seeing Edmonton in fourth right now, but they've got McDavid. They've got Draisaitl. I think Campbell can turn it around, but I think it's that Canadian market psychology thing going on with him right now. But I would say those two are locks, but overall, Pacific pretty wide open. The West overall really wide open, which is good because it makes the season more interesting. Okay. We're at the 50-minute mark here. I'll quickly talk about refs. Okay, I want to talk about the ref shortage in North America right now because there is a shortage on refs right now in North America. Woohoo. Redundant. And why is that the case? I think the case is it's just a lack of respect for officials. I think we've kind of normalized it being okay to freak out at refs, which, yeah, I know they make mistakes. I get that. It's a very emotional game. I get that too. But what's the incentive for someone to be a referee? Because it's not like it pays amazingly, right? And you could argue, well, maybe refs need to be paid more, but then there's more money that needs to be generated by the sport. It's already a very expensive sport. I don't know if that's the solution. I think it's a culture change that we need to make. I think I think coaches need to stop freaking out at refs, especially like youth refs, right? Like, if you have like 5 and 6-year-olds and the coach is freaking out at the ref, like, what are you doing? Because the ref's probably like a teenager too, if he's reffing like little guys. What are you doing freaking out at this guy? Because he might quit being a ref. I was a ref when I was like 12, and I stopped because a coach freaked out at me, and it was little guys. And it's like, hey, I'm 12. You're yelling at a 12-year-old. And that killed it for me, that one moment, right? So there needs to be an incentive if we want more refs. And it's important that we should want more refs because if we don't have refs, then we don't have hockey games. It's simple as that. I know the beer league I play in right now has a ref shortage, and there's some pretty bad refs in that. But at the same time, there are some really good refs in that league too. I know a couple guys who are new to reffing. Last season was their first season as a ref, and I think they're doing a fantastic job. So I do, like, if you're an adult already, I don't think that should stop you from being a ref. I think coaches just need to smarten up. I think players need to smarten up. We need to stop normalizing that freaking out at the ref is okay. And then obviously, crazy parents in the stands. I know there's great hockey parents out there. I'd say most parents are good hockey parents, but there's the crazy ones. And that can kill it for a ref too, I think. So I think there just needs to be more respect in the game. I think refs need to get a bit more recognition when they do a good job. I don't know how you do that, but yeah, I think that's the big problem right now. And I don't know how you fix that, really. Do like a ref appreciation day. That would go over well, right? In the NHL. Let's talk about some history. Okay, I want to talk about the 2008 and 2009 Stanley Cup Finals. And yeah, I'm going to keep this pretty quick because we're getting pretty close to the 1 hour mark. So yeah, 2008, a very, very young Pittsburgh Penguins team goes into Detroit for the Stanley Cup Finals. Detroit, a very proven team. Pittsburgh, not so much. They got Crosby, they got Malkin. They're in their early 20s at this point. Very unproven, but very exciting team. Marc-Andre Fleury as well. Chris Letang. Yeah, lots of stuff going on there. Ryan Whitney as well was on that team, I believe. So, yeah, Spit and Chicklets, great podcast. It's definitely one I listen to quite a bit. And they lost. They lost in 6. And can you be that surprised? I mean, it's Detroit, right? They still got Lindstrom. They still got Zetterberg. They're a big deal, right? That's the team. It's not too surprising. But you listen to interviews. I think it was an interview with Crosby. It might have been on Chicklets where he really talks about the importance of how tough of a feeling it is to lose. And then the next year, very poetic that they have the rematch. and Pittsburgh wins, right? In Game 6 and Game 7 being very close games. What a crazy series. But both series were, but that second one. You can't beat Game 7 in the playoffs, even if you don't like both teams, or Game 7 in the finals, rather. Like, insane. 2019, Boston, St. Louis, that was awesome. I remember Game 7 being like a spectacle. I was at like one of the local bars watching it with a friend, and it was crazy. You know, I was living in a really small town at the time. It was the talk of the town. It was awesome. And 2007, Pittsburgh, they found a way. I think them knowing how bad of a feeling it was to lose really fueled that playoff run the next year. And we saw that with Edmonton too in the 80s, right? They lost to the Islanders. I think they got swept by the Islanders in the finals. And then they beat the Islanders the next year, preventing them from winning their 5th Stanley Cup in a row. So, very similar stories. That Edmonton team was pretty young too, so yeah, they had a lot to learn, but you know, they learned it. And you see the same thing with Tampa getting swept in the first round by Columbus and then winning 2 in a row. I think they could become a dynasty and win another one this year. I know I said I wasn't going to talk about my pick, but Tampa is definitely a team I'm thinking about. I bet against them the last few years, and obviously that didn't work out so well. I think I picked Florida last year, actually. I think I had Tampa all year, and then at the last minute I switched to Florida, and I look like an idiot. So there you go. But yeah, Pittsburgh Penguins, really cool. Really cool story. I really didn't like him after this, but you know, I got a lot of respect for Crosby. He's done a lot for this country, Canada, helping us to success. So yeah, there you go. Wanted to talk about that. Okay, fantasy hockey. It's the last thing I'm going to talk about. My fantasy pick for the week or for this podcast or whatever, I don't know. I'm not going to make this a segment, but Jeff Skinner, I always see him available in both of my leagues. I think last time I checked, he was like 34th overall. And I think there's just a lot of good left wingers out there. It's kind of tough to fit him into a roster because you have to drop someone, right? So I don't know. I picked him up a few times though. He's having a pretty good year, right? I mean, he's got a point streak going here. How many games is that? It's 8 games. And he's got quite a few multi-point games in there too. 4 assists against Columbus. Had a good game against Arizona recently. I don't see any game winners there, but tons of shots. And yeah, you know, he's a good pickup if it's available, if the schedule is favorable that week. I highly recommend picking up Jeff Skinner. So, anywho. So that concludes episode 1 of the Hockey Variety Hour podcast. I had fun. I wasn't too nervous the whole time, so there you go. I do plan on doing a second episode. I got tons of stuff I want to talk about. Maybe get an interview here and there. I don't know anyone who's like a big deal in the hockey scene, but I don't know. We'll get a buddy on here and talk hockey, you know. That's it. I'm just trying to do something that's a bit different, but again, this podcast, it's all about me, so feel free to leave a like. Feel free to subscribe as well. I don't blame you if you don't turn on the bell notification, because I'm sure those are kind of annoying, but if that's how you do things, do it up. Yeah, it'd be cool to get like a little bit of a following here at this podcast. So yeah, if you do enjoy it, make sure you like, subscribe, all that, and I will talk to you again soon.